Welcome to Cloud Salon. Cloud Salon, for those of you who may not know, was begun in April 2020 to bring invited guests into the DT universe. And so for me, I am John Roach. I'm a full-time faculty at Parsons. I teach in the School of Design Strategies, but I've also taught MFA DT in the Thesis 2 class a number of times. So I'm really happy to be back. Thank you all for having me. And I think I was asked to moderate this talk for a few different reasons. One of them, being that Kelly and I both have a shared interest in the multisensory in our work, but also an important aim for Kelly's work is her attention to the non-human and the web of connections and technological and otherwise that connect everything. And so this is something that we definitely share in common. So about Kelly Heaton is our guest, and she's a creative polymath and animist. She's invented a practice called electronic naturalism to explore the mysteries of life through the language of circuits. Kelly champions embodied intelligence as a way to counteract the mind-body imbalances of modern technology. She's an active contributor to the open source hardware community, and her songbird circuits symbolize the power of analog design principles at a time in which digital is the dominant paradigm. Moreover, her physical relationships with electronic media is a political act against the virtual escapism that threatens our well-being. And so with that, I want to hand it off to Kelly Heaton. Thanks for joining us, Kelly.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me and everyone for being here. I'm about to take you through a lot of slides, and my reason in doing that is to give you an overview of my career, which is now going on 3 decades, but also so that when we come to the discussion part, you can ask me about really any time period from my career, because I see it all as just like cycling through time, but it's all still relevant to me. So it doesn't have to just be my current work. So I am an electronic artist, but often when I say that to people, they think, oh, you're digital and you're a coder. And no, I mean, yes, I use those tools sometimes, but what I'm really interested in is what is electricity, but even more so, not electricity, but like what is the sort of immaterial substance that makes things come to life? In effect, you could say what I'm really interested in is prana or chi. So I invented a practice that I call electronic naturalism, whereby I use circuits to explore lifelike qualities. Now, this did not come naturally to me. It took me many, many years to develop this. I was a student at the MIT Media Lab. But at the time when I was there, I really didn't know how to build my own circuits. And you'll see in a minute that I worked with other found objects in the beginning. But I began my practice of analog electronics to say like, whoa, there's a lot of complexity in electronic media and in the digital world. I want to go back to the fundamentals, like really the brick and mortar of what is electricity as a medium, what is going on here where electrical phenomena are emerging and leading then all the way up to where we are today with these just like tremendous processors, graphical user interfaces, and now AI. So this is an example of one of my pieces. This is a little circuit that sings like a bird. So the sound that you're hearing is generated by an analog electronic circuit. And it's also light sensitive. So I'll come back to that later, but that just kind of gives you a taste of what I mean when I say I make circuits that explore lifelike behaviors. But I've also really been interested, which is a harder problem, but I'm really interested in knowing like, how can we imagine electricity flowing through ourselves? I'm a yogi, and I love spiritual studies and Vedic philosophy. And I love this idea of my own energy field. And I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out how I can use my knowledge of electrical engineering to create metaphors for my own energy, my aura, and then the energy and aura of others and the relationship therewith. My background, going all the way back, just so you kind of know the common themes that run throughout all of my work, is wilderness. I love animals and magical thinking, like, the Mickey Mouse. But I didn't know how to explore that when I was in art school, because when I came through, and this was back in the early 90s, there was no electronic art program. I only found out much later in my life who some of the early pioneers of electronic art are. But at the time, there was no notion of that. So I was a painter because that was what was available to me. And I was surrounded by Cartesian thinking. So again, I was in high school in the 80s and then in college in the 90s. Western Cartesian thought dominated what I was taught. The idea of, this is Helen Frankenthaler in the lower right-hand corner, but the idea of flow and fields. I mean, it was there and it was explored in a painterly way, but at this point in time, I didn't have any language for how this might be looked at through the lens of electricity. So there was a real dichotomy that drove me nuts when I was younger. On the one hand, I had science, which is like exercising the logical part of my brain. And on the other hand, I had art, but the two were literally oil and water, and I was not capable to mix them, but that's what I wanted to do. I spent a lot of time studying ways in which other cultures and artists from different points in history had looked at the intersection between scientific inquiry and art. And there's so many incredible examples, as I'm sure many of you are aware. And this is back now to an image from my own work where I was looking at chemistry and molecules as having personality. I was also trying to use painting to explore metaphors of looking for the inner self. And then leading up to at this point, I was in my late 20s, having gone back and forth between art and science, I discovered that electricity could be used as an artistic medium. It's a long story how I ended up at the Media Lab, but it wasn't a linear path. I did not know that I wanted to go there. I was actually invited during the dot-com bubble, which it's funny now being in this AI. We're not really in a bubble, but you know what I mean, where it's just like everyone's talking about it. That's what things were like at the late 90s. And because I had this interest in science, my colleagues at the Media Lab were like, hey, let's take an artist and bring you in and see what happens when we expose you to a lot of technology. It was absolutely wild. It was very difficult. I didn't know what I was doing, but I got to study with these amazing people. So Joe Paradiso and Hiroshi Ishii, Neil Gershenfeld, how to make almost anything. So I was very fortunate that this was part of my this was part of my art education, but nobody talked about it as art at this point in time. So also in the dot-com boom, there were all kinds of weird things happening with technology. A lot of people thought technology was just it was taking over everything. All of my friends were learning how to write code. There was a concept of technology and art, but again, it was all software related, like John Maida and the early stages of processing, and that was happening when I was at the lab. And meanwhile, there was this crazy consumerism going on. So the picture you see here on the left is people rioting and beating each other up at Walmart or something to buy Tickle Me Elmo, which was it was just such a crazy period of time. So I got really interested in technology and machine intelligence and where it was overlapping with familiar metaphor, in this case, toys, because I had this background, as I told you, where I loved animals and I loved nature, and you were starting to see like the Furby come out as this like fully animatronic robot that you could have at home, which was like so unthinkable. It's hard to understand how strange this was at the time, like late 90s, early 2000s. But so I decided to make Furby a medium. Um, because I wasn't a great electrical engineer, I had to collaborate heavily, but I also relied on my skills as an artist, in this case, an illustrator, who had studied science in a sort of more traditional way. And I adopted 19th century anatomical illustration to do the anatomy of the Furby. And then I took literally took, I got in trouble for this because I placed an order for 400 limited edition Christmas Furbies with my MIT Media Lab budget, and that was not appreciated, but it happened. And I worked with an engineer to reprogram them to make a giant mirror that reflects your body when you stand in front of it. And if you look at the eyes and the beak of the Furby, it looks like a water molecule. So it was really like narcissist's pool rendered in machine intelligence. So this was the piece being shown at the De Cordova Museum in 2001. And interestingly, this is also the same time period when Danny Rosen made his first wooden mirror. So as part of working on Reflection Loop, I got really interested in the idea of pseudocode as a poetic language and how I could use code to get into the mind frame or to really think about the consciousness of machine intelligence. And having worked with Furby, which was like this digital, well, yeah, I mean, for reprogramming a Furby has put me into a digital space, but I really wanted to understand like the body component of it. And so I get taking another like really popular toy of the time, Tickle Me Elmo, who to me felt like much more emotional than Furby. It was like Furby's was like the nerdy brainiac cousin of the giggling, quivering Tickle Me Elmo. So I trapped 64 previously owned Tickle Me Elmos in their natural habitat off of eBay, and documented where they all came from, and then looked at this dichotomy between this plush familiar toy that I had grown up with, like with teddy bears and so forth, and this like giggle mechanism. So the installation Live Pelt, which was the overarching show in which I explored Tickle Me Elmo, had many different components, from me trapping them on eBay to skinning them. I worked with a taxidermist to mount their heads on plaques that I later re-auctioned through eBay, and then I used their electronics to make a coat out of their pelts and their electronics. It's like, in many ways, this piece was my response to the 9/11 bombings. So it was like this, there so many things came together in this coat, so many themes that were affecting me at this time in history, from machine intelligence to massive crazy consumerism to terrorism, to what is the role of the female artist, as being like, consuming and creating media and giving birth to new forms. So looking back into history, other artists that have tried to reconcile with technology, Nam June Paik being, of course, like a really great one. Very often, and as I was doing, even having gone through the Media Lab, but not yet truly understanding how to make circuits, you often find yourself like interacting with the veneer of the technology. It's not that you wouldn't want to do more than that. It's just really hard to get inside. And I really wanted to get inside. Like, yes, I had worked with a Tickle Me Elmo demo. I had worked with Furby, but in the case of Furby, I collaborated with an engineer to do the reprogramming. And I was like, what's going on in there? Like, what is this electrical magic that's happening, right? Because as Nikola Tesla says, if you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. I'm not the first artist to think about that, right? Like, you don't necessarily have to be an electronic artist to go down this path. Like, artists for time immemorial have been asking, like, what the heck is this like magical vibratory electrical substance that's flowing through the universe? And now, of course, I think that really it was the Vedic philosophers and the Buddhists who had the best understanding of this with prana and chi. But in any event, like, we're all trying to get it, like, what is this thing that we can't touch or feel or taste, but is there and vibrating and animating everything? So that led me into my practice of electronic naturalism, where I went back to the basics and I built circuits by hand. It took me so many years to figure out how to do this because there was nothing like I could find. I couldn't Google like how to make a circuit that sings like a bird. Like, I just sort of had to scrape and patch things together and break circuits. But eventually I was able to make some things that were, interesting and had some lifelike qualities. So this is a watercolor of a tree frog into which I have built a circuit that generates this waveform that produces kind of this haunting frog-like sound. So the first like body of work where I really pulled all of my own handmade circuits together was called the parallel series. The parallel series is a pun. If you know electrical engineering, it's a term used in electrical engineering. But this idea that I was working with traditional media art in parallel with electronic media. So many of the pieces that I did from this time period were extremely pedagogical. And I actually love the aesthetic where I was building the circuit and at the same time making drawings and allowing people to see my thought process surrounding them. And this practice actually came out of not a desire or thinking it was cool or trying to like match some sort of contemporary art trend, but like literally I had to do this in order to survive. Like, building these circuits was so hard for me that I had to do this. And so I made that a feature. And I just share that with you in case it resonates for your own practice. As these works got more sophisticated, so this is again a drawing and a painting. And in the background, the sound you hear are circuits that are producing the sounds of night insects. So, it's like these works, they really are alive in a way, right? I mean, because the electronics, it's happening, it's real time, it's not a recording, it's not a simulation because it's not digital. These are just like widgets vibrating when they're exposed to electricity, which is just like me being alive because I have electricity in my body, or a cricket chirping because it's got electricity in its body. And that was just like totally mind-boggling to me. So I found myself more and more in this world surrounded by electronic media and natural media, whatever natural even is anymore. I'll talk about that more later. But so yeah, it was like a really weird space in which to be. And this was back in 2015, where still there wasn't a lot of like, I didn't have a lot of peers who I could talk to about this. It was a difficult space in which to be. And my spiritual practice also in tandem with what I was doing continued to deepen. I had a vision about this bee that came to me in a shamanic drumming session, and the bee like implored me to really listen to what was happening with nature, and that led to a body of work called pollination. This piece is an 11-foot tall sculpture representing the chakras of a body, where I put the beehive as the heart chakra, and the bees flying around this center comb structure were my way of representing the electromagnetic field of the heart. So I'm going to keep moving on just so we can cover ground. I can come back to some of these things, but in pollination, again, I've already told you I was really interested in moving from traditional media, so painting and traditional sculpture, into electronic media. And that then took me to think like, well, why not then move into the realm of perfumery? And so I became a perfumer as part of this exhibition. And I also really amplified my spiritual practice, looking at how the different chakras in the body and the different energies that they represented were these facets of consciousness that as an artist, I could like weave together into this huge ecological narrative. I was also looking at the impact of technology on culture. So on the left here, I was using chips on someone's body, like as though they were being infested. Like this piece came from a series called Diseases of the Hive. And how was technology affecting and overtaking not only bees, which is a serious problem, how our use of pesticides and so forth is affect. And I mean, there's so many things. This is such a deep topic, but I felt like technology was similarly, if you will, infesting humanity. 2016. I mean, gosh, what do I even say? These images are still so relevant. It's like almost weird. Like, how are we still here? You know, I can't even believe it. It's crazy. But in the top right, I made a painting of Vladimir Putin with a circuit in front of him, right? Because he was like hiding behind cybersecurity, and he still is. That piece is called The Operational Amplifier. And then, of course, Donald Trump in the bottom. And today, I don't know if you guys know, but he had his big like stock market IPO. And it's just like, honestly, these paintings are more relevant now than ever. But so this idea of the human electric, like what was happening to society and what was happening to our humanity, that social media and false news and cyber warfare was increasingly infiltrating our society. Okay, but taking a deep breath, returning to my interest in nature and in animals, which honestly has been my solace, as I'm sure it is for many of you as well. I maintained in parallel my ongoing practice at looking at how I could use circuits to explore the magic of living systems. Um, oh, sorry. Now I'm going to take a little bit of a segue, but it is actually very relevant to where my practice is today. If I go back to these slides, no, here. Yeah, okay. So the picture of Lady Gaga with the image that's photo collaged on the front. So this was in 2015, and it frustrated me immensely that while I was working with digital imagery and collaging things together in Photoshop, like I didn't want to just print this out as a digital C print. I wanted it to have some physicality in hand. And so I decided that my best option was to become a screen printer. And so I applied to go to Otis College of Art and Design in Los Angeles. And this was a piece that I made while I was there, using a combination of digital printing for the photo image of the woman behind. And then I used screen printing to put the circuit in front of her. What was really cool about desiring this physical object to come out of my digital collages is that I suddenly realized, like, oh my gosh, I should explore circuit board printmaking instead of just making my own circuits completely by hand. Like, why not explore using the industry fabrication process to make my own printed circuit boards? Other artists had started doing this at the same time. These are badges that were created for like DEF CON and Hackaday. using circuit boards as a printmaking medium. So my first like major work in this vein was to take the pretty bird I showed you way back at the beginning of the presentation and to make it huge. And just to give you a sense for scale, I have the piece right here I'll hold up. So like this is like a really, really big circuit board. In fact, it's the largest circuit board that you can make using the standard fabrication methods in factories. And I've been working with a factory in Shenzhen, China since 2018. So you saw this before, the pretty bird piece. I'm going to skip through these really quickly, but I just wanted you to see behind the scenes of how I make my circuits. I use a breadboard and I just spend many, many hours like working through trying different configuration of my components, like a plug and play methodology. Skipping over that. I'm going to move through this quickly. Please ask me to come back to these if you want to know more about actually building circuits yourself, because I would love to talk to you about that. But in the interest of time, I'm going to move ahead. So here I am with a bunch of my like sculptural circuits and the central board I called my Mother Nature board, where I built a completely analog electronic sequencer to sequence when the birds would sing. So all the sounds we are hearing are analog electronic. They're all generated by the circuits inside of the birds. And the reason that it sounds like the birds are singing at different times is because they are, because that central piece is turning them on and off in different patterns. It's, of course, much easier to do this with like an Arduino or something, but I just love the sculptural form of the analog electronic version. So I've used my analog electronics to make like fluttering lights for butterflies, also that you can see in this piece. So all of the lights that are moving around the outside, that's all done using hardware. So there's no software involved in the creation of this. I've been saying that to people for like 20 years and usually nobody cares. But the reason that I keep saying it and the reason that I want you to care is that the lifelike behaviors are actually lifelike. In other words, the vibrations that are happening in the electronic hardware are autonomously vibrating. Like I've set up a body architecture for the circuit for electricity to run through it. And then this is what it does. I am not writing code to simulate the patterns. It's not it's not a large language model. It's a body. And that's very important to me, the embodied intelligence of the electronics. Same with this piece. The sounds you hear are all analog electronic. So as it turns out, analog electronics are like so incredibly good at making lifelike insect sounds and even bird sounds that, again, most people, when they hear it, they're like, oh yeah, it's a recording, but it's not. So the sound that you just heard from that bird is created by the circuit that's inside of that bird, again, analog electronic. And the little animating GIF that you see in the upper corner of the screen are neurons inside of the brain of the living mouse. And I was given this video by a scientist in Washington State. It became increasingly apparent to me that the vibrating patterns in my analog electronic insects and birds we're really an analog of the synapses that are firing in the brain of biological organisms. And I became fascinated by this insight as a model for consciousness. I think that analog electronics and getting really deeply into electronic media can lead to all sorts of very profound insights about consciousness, about spirituality, about life. And that's why I'm very much an animist, because I really see everything as being living, just in different ways. In 2020, I decided to experiment with this concept in an explicit way by partnering with Johann Diedrich to use software artificial intelligence to record and analyze one of my analog electronic songbirds. And that was a fascinating exercise to use digital AI to assess analog AI. Again, I can talk to you more about the conclusions that we had from that work if you're interested. But I love the idea that you can take one schematic for an electronic thing and move it through many different form factors, whether it's a printed circuit or a sculpture or like this raw form in a breadboard. The ability to use circuit boards as like a living printmaking medium is fascinating to me. And so I continue with my screen printing practice. So this piece that you're looking at here is not a circuit board, but actually a multi-layered screen print where the copper traces that you see are using foil transfer. I have gone on to build a sculpture that I can talk to you about and demonstrate for you live called Nightjar, which came out of my deepfake bird song work with Johann Diedrich. I continue to explore when I can. Circuit board is a printmaking medium. This is, again, a printed medium with the circuits embedded. Same here. Also exploring the circuit board as a tableau for spiritual concepts. This is the tree of life. I've made crystal grids using vibration as a way of programming rock crystals for spiritual practice and intention setting. This is copper laminated to a sheet of paper that I have rubbed back and etched by hand to explore circuit board printmaking as yeah, a more physical medium. And I'm also involved in making textiles so that I can put people inside of my quote unquote circuit boards. That's one of the things I'm working on now. Ecosystems of naturalistic circuits. I'm building crystal radios now. I'm fascinated by antenna. I think I'm just like interested in too many things. Sorry. The sound you hear right there is like from my crystal radio. So I love this idea that electricity and the Vajra from ancient Vedic philosophy is still here with us today, right? It's like the most powerful instrument known in the universe. The similarities between energy medicine and electrical engineering are very compelling and an ongoing theme of my work. So just to conclude this, I think that we do these things out of love, and that through deeply understanding things, we build character.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kelly. That was
You're
amazing.
welcome.
And
Great.
because you have so many things going on here, as you said, we have a lot to talk about. And I think, something that was interesting to me was, and maybe we can come back to it, is the idea of sort of flows and systems and the way you talk about that in relation to your work. But I wanted to raise three questions
Yeah.
that one of our participants here put in the chat. And so each one of these is a big question. So let's see where we go with this. So first, Arden S asks, how did you figure out the bird chirp frequencies? Did you do it by ear, or did you end up studying the harmonics of different species? I'm also interested in synthesizing bird calls.
Yeah. So I did it entirely experimentally because there was with analog electronics, there's no way to approach this. There was no documentation on this. Like, plus I approach this as an artist, not as an engineer. So like this is me playing with my breadboard and trying different configurations, changing capacitor values, changing connections between them. Like, I mean, really, I mean, thousands of hours at my breadboard. Kind of terrifying, really, in hindsight, but yeah.
I was wondering, thinking about this work and this role of play in it, and also I think
Yeah.
thinking, that question about sound and sound frequencies. If you were sort of thinking about David Tudor at all and some of his sort of crazy circuits that he was making back in the day.
So I humbly admit that it did not occur to me until 2018 that I was rebuilding analog electronic sound synthesis. I did not even know that that existed because I came at this from the perspective of somebody who was fascinated with life, nature, and spirituality. And so I know who David Tudor is now, but I only know who he is now because I would show this work to people and they'd go, "Oh, wow, do you know about David Tudor?" And I'd say no. And they'd be like, "How can you not know about David Tudor?" I was a painter, nature girl, spiritual practitioner who by fate ended up at the media lab exposed to electronics and was like, I want to make sense of this. So I arrived at many of the same conclusions and engineering, if you will, solutions, but I am not an engineer. Maybe you could call me that today, but that is not where I came from.
I think that that's why your work looks the way it does. I think that
Exactly.
that idea of, I think we talk a lot in education about understanding where you came from and understanding precedents, but sometimes those things can guide your work. And I think what you have in some ways, John Cage, I think, talks about it as the tourist attitude, where it's like sometimes you have to come to something as if you don't know anything about it and you don't know where you've been and you don't know where you're going. And I kind of see a
I
lot of
think with
that
art,
play.
I mean, honestly, like I don't know how to make art any other way. When I try to make art, when I think I know what I'm doing, it always comes out really badly.
Understood. Yes. I'm gonna launch into a few more questions here. I'm gonna skip number two for a second because that seems like a big one. But I'm gonna say again from Arden. Um, how did you document and show your work? Particularly, I think maybe Arden's talking specifically about in those early years, like if you think about the early 2000s, but how do you document this kind of work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I was very privileged. If you want to, should I, let me pause here. Should I switch off my presentation? I have some things here I can also show
Oh,
physically.
sure. Yeah.
So stop screen sharing.
I'm also going to put in the chat Kelly's Instagram and website.
Yes. Now, so I stopped screen sharing. So are you seeing me now or no?
No, I'm just seeing, I think you stopped your keynote presentation.
Stop.
So now if you want to go down to the share screen at the bottom, you should be able to unshare.
Hmm.
Just at the bottom of your Zoom screen, maybe.
Let's see. No, it's not. I said stop share.
Okay, wait, here. I think I can. There you
Yeah.
go. You
Okay.
got
There we
it.
go. All right. Okay. All right. So how do you document it? Yes. So for 2 decades of my career, I was very fortunate to have a gallery called Ronald Feldman Fine Arts, and he has unfortunately since passed away. He passed away a couple of years ago, and I currently do not have representation. Plus, um, right as he was declining, I was supposed to have my big exhibition of electronic naturalism. So much of the work that you saw in that presentation has never been shown. I just have it in storage. So presenting it is something that I very much want to do, but right now my best option is just to keep really good archives and to push things onto social media, and to, yeah, talk about it and do the best I can. But the truth is, and exhibitions to this day, physical brick and mortar exhibitions are the best way to present a complex narrative so that people can come and see the artifacts in person and also see like different video and schematics. I was involved in an exhibition last summer at the Haus der Kunst in Munich, and that was really fantastic because I was able to kind of show the pieces from electronic naturalism in context with some of the schematics, but it was, it was still small scale, but yeah.
I mean, it's challenging with multi-sensory work. I mean, this is not purely visual. It's not even purely sound. You have works that deal with scent, so I think that
Right.
idea of, the fact that you dipped into the world of perfumery is a whole other level at which, this isn't something that can be documented in a traditional way.
Um, yeah, no, that's true. But I really think we've come to this point in art history where it's all about dialogue and community anyway. And so all these different journeys and things that I've navigated through, like that was for the purpose of my own understanding and enrichment, but then ultimately to share that with other people. And that comes through talking about it and presenting it in any kind of way and getting feedback on it. I mean, on some level, with the complexity in the world right now, I think it's really a shame that in the last decade, we've seen such a aggressive commercialization of the art world because there is such a backlog of work and shows that are not necessarily commercial in orientation. They're more exploratory and experimental, but they really get at this inflection point that we're living through right now and that we're all experiencing, and everybody trying to reconcile with complexity, everybody trying to reconcile with systems. And now, like, what does AI mean? Like, what does it mean to have consciousness emerging in a machine intelligent form? And perfume is nothing more than energy, let's say prana, being expressed through the materiality or the channel of scent. So, I
Mm.
mean, humans are these limited perceptual beings. I mean, when I say limited, meaning that like there's so much more out there that we just simply are not equipped in our own hardware to detect. But working with perfume and electronics and painting, it's not random. I'm trying to understand like what's out there. What's this magical force, this field that I'm existing in? What's the vibration that's surrounding me? And I'm using every sensory channel at my disposal to try and circumnavigate that space, because at the end of the day, like those are all the instruments that I have to look through. But a practice like that for an artist, of course, is highly experimental. There isn't any like obvious artifact that I'm making saying like, here, frame this. But I mean, for me, art's never been any other way. Like I don't know how to make work just to sell it. Like to me, that's something else. That's design. This piece that I'm working on, Nightjar. This is going to be an artist edition for sale, and so that's design. That's me making an object, right? But the experimental videos that I showed you, whereby I was developing the circuit, like that's like really the art, right? The whole backstory. That's what makes that piece meaningful. Me working with Johann Diedrich on analyzing the sound. That's why that piece is so meaningful. Not like the object in the end. And I really hope we can get back more to that community and dialogue orientation in the art world, because like we need it for our soul, asking those big questions. That's our job as artists, is to ask the big questions and to have the hard conversations and to live in the space of beauty and possibility and to take huge risks and, not to like sell your work for $200,000 at a secondary auction. I mean, that would be nice, but it's it's not why you do it.
Right. Yeah, for you, and certainly I know I think about this a lot. Well, as well, it is those connections and that kind of flow as you move from project to project and seeing the kind of growth of an idea. Um, I wanted to actually come back to some questions that are in the chat. Do you
Yeah,
mind answering a few technical questions?
I do not mind.
Okay, so Mawa asks, when observing an already functioning circuit, what is your thought process in terms of beginning to take it apart? Reverse engineering. How do you do that in your head? What are top three circuit components to look for first?
Okay, so first of all, you have to have a multimeter. You need an oscilloscope. Like that's like critical. Without that, I wouldn't touch it. um, so what I would do is figure out where is power and ground. So I know my voltage levels. And then I would, from the main power supply, I would try to look for circuit clusters that I recognize from past experience. So I would look for example, transistor amplifiers. I would look for op amps. I would ask myself, like, is this a digital circuit? Is there a chip on here? If there's a chip, that's much more difficult. Reverse engineering a digital circuit is harder. But if it's an analog circuit, you can begin to use your oscilloscope. So you would ground your oscilloscope probe, and then you can go through and touch on various locations in the circuit and look at the signal. How is it being transformed? It kind of starts to give you a feeling for what's actually happening in there. Does that answer the question?
Let's see. Yep, thank you so much, Mawa says.
You are
Okay, and
welcome.
Prashant asks, your work is so fascinating. I'm interested to know how you introduce randomness into these sequenced sounds. I've been
Oh,
studying Euclidean sequencers, and I'm wondering if you used a sequencer of some kind.
well, I built my own. So that was why I wanted to show you the Mother Nature board, if you remember. One of the best sources for randomness in a circuit is a abused transistor. What I mean by that is that if you take a transistor and you give the collector a safe voltage level, a DC voltage through a resistor, and you tap the signal off, your signal is going to come off the base, okay? And then you do not ground the emitter. So the emitter of your transistor is left floating. What happens due to the internal doping of the transistor, the doping is basically like the structure of the silicon semiconducting diode that's inside of every transistor. It's unique. And so the signal that's going to come out off of that base lead will be pure noise. Now, it's happening at fairly high frequency. So what I have done was to take that noise and run it through several amplification stages and then use a Schottky diode to rectify it. So chop off one part of it so you just get, the top part. And then every time it crosses over a certain voltage threshold, that could be recognized by a chip such as a shift register. So you can use the noise off of a broken, an abused, sorry, for lack of a better word, transistor to shift a shift register. And it'll just be totally random. You could also run it through an op amp to like really, really crank it up to get a random signal. And we did that in a class that I taught with Luke Dubois at NYU last fall, where we then took the output of that and would plug it into, a piece of audio equipment, like so you could use it to clock the beat of a drum machine, and you just get like some really weird effect. Does that answer your question?
Let's see if we get a thumbs up from Prashant. Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Good.
So we just have a couple minutes left, and I don't see any other questions in the chat, but I wanted to, something that I really appreciate in your work is the way that you connect circuits to the body and the way you connect then beyond the body out to larger systems, this kind of flowing out through nature, even to the
Yeah.
point of, I love what you shared at the end where things become garments or life-sized, resistors. That suddenly scale becomes a really important part of the work as well. That I would love to ask you, how do these notions, there you go. Awesome. How do the notions of flow and connectivity and the kind of journey you've gone through as an artist thinking about prana, how does that influence your work as a collaborator?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I have to say my yoga practice is the basis really of everything now. It's so dear to me because ecological thinking is what the world needs now. Understanding things not by breaking them down into parts, but by building them back up into collaborative systems. Understanding that we are not isolated at all. That is such a flawed ego construct. Not only does it lead to unhappiness, but it just isn't true. We are participating in a conscious system that is in everything, everyone, everywhere. Like it's we are all connected. I'm certain that in my lifetime they will discover that there's a consciousness field that we're participating in. So you know, that just from an ethical, moral, spiritual side is so important to me in my heart. But I also think it's the only way we have to heal the planet, to foster empathy in people, to reconnect each other through empathy and compassion, and to understand that all of our actions are connected. And that's as challenging as that can be in some ways, it's also incredibly powerful. And I'm really heartened that I see more and more people stepping into that way of thinking. Thank goodness, like the age of the narcissist is ending. Like, good riddance.
Yeah, I think that's probably a great line to end on. We've reached 4 o'clock, and thank you everybody who came to Cloud
Thank
Salon
you.
today, and thank you so much, Kelly. That was an illuminating talk. Thank you so much.
Good. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.